Okay, this video lesson is going to be just a quick look at using proportions, and we are going to be solving problems using a proportion. Let's take a look at some steps here. First thing you need to do is determine the correct ratio that is needed to answer the specific question. Remember, we have talked about ratios can be part to part ratios. We also have part to whole ratios or whole to part. So we need to be sure that we understand from the question exactly what we're trying to determine. And then when we have that, there are three strategies we've learned that we can use. We can look within the ratio, we can look between the ratios, or we can use cross products. So let's take a look at some examples. Here's practice problem 1. It says that a recipe for pizza dough calls for 2 tablespoons of salt for every 5 cups of flour. So with that information, how many teaspoons of salt will be needed for 25 cups of flour? Okay, so in this one, we're given the ratio 2 teaspoons of salt for every 5 cups of flour. So let's go ahead and write down that ratio. So we have 2 teaspoons of salt for 5 cups of flour. Let's go ahead and label it. We have our salt here and our flour as the denominator. So we need to label that to make sure when we set up our proportion we use the same numerator and denominator as far as salt or flour. And let's read it. It says how many teaspoons of salt will be needed for 25 cups of flour. So what we're given is the flour, and that's 25 cups. And then what we're trying to solve is how much salt. So this is our proportion. And remember, we have a couple strategies. We can look within the ratio. And in this one, there's not really a relationship between 2 and 5. We can't multiply 2 times anything to get 5, or not by a whole number, or divide. So we're not going to use that relationship. But let's look between the ratios. You see here, between 5 and 25, there's a relationship. And what we're doing is we're multiplying 5 times 5 to get 25. So we're going to do the same thing at the top. We're going to multiply 2 times 5 for this relationship here to figure out x. And then 2 times 5 equals 10. So we understand this one, that x equals 10. So we need 10 teaspoons of salt. Alright, practice problem number 2. The ratio of boys to girls at the local junior college is 2 to 3. That's our ratio. I'm going to write that down. 2 to 3, and that's a ratio of boys to girls. Alright, now it says if there is a total of 600 students, how many girls attend classes at the junior college? Now, notice that it introduces the idea of total, and that's a total of 600 students. Neither one of these in the given ratio that I've written down represents the total. However, remember that in any ratio, if you have 2 parts, you also have a ratio of part to total. So let's think about what we're given. We're given a total of 600 students, and we're asked to find how many girls attend classes. So we're trying to figure out the number of girls. So let's identify this. This is girls, and this represents total. Well, what ratio do we need to use in order to set up this proportion? Well, we need to use what we know about the number of girls compared to total students. So we look at our original ratio 2 to 3. The 3 represents the number of girls, so we would use the 3 up here. And to figure out the total, we just add these 2 parts, 2 and 3, and we get 5. So our ratio of 3 to 5 now tells us the ratio of the number of girls to total students based on the ratio that was given to us. So now we've set up our proportion, this being the proportion that we need, and we can just solve the proportion. Now, remembering our strategies, we could look within the ratio, or we could look between the ratios for relationships. Now, there's really not a ratio here there's not a relationship within the ratio. There is a relationship here between the ratios, but that's kind of hard to see right off the bat. Some of you may see it. I think it might be best to use the strategy of solving a proportion for this one. So let's go ahead and solve the proportion using cross products. Remember, I taught you that the cross products are equal in a proportion. So what we can do for this one is we can do what we call cross multiply and divide. We're going to multiply these two, 600 times 3. And when we multiply 600 times 3, we're going to get 1,800. And then we're going to divide by the number that's with the variable. So we're going to cross multiply and divide. So once we get our 1,800, now we need to divide 1,800 by 5. So let me try to do that right here. 1,800 divided by 5. So when we solve it, let's see, 5 goes into 18 3 times. 5 times 3 is 15. When I subtract, I get a remainder of 3. I'm going to bring down my 0. 5 goes into 30 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. I no longer have a remainder. I do have this other 0 to work with, and 5 goes into 0 times. So our answer is 360. Now, that was a tough one because you had to remember the whole idea of finding a total when all you're given are the two parts. And we knew we needed a total because it mentioned that there were a total of 600 students. So, out of the 600 students, 360 of them would be girls. Okay, final practice problem number 3. It says that Darren has a collection of 147 sports cards. The collection consists of both baseball and football cards at a ratio of 2 to 5. How many football cards does he have? Okay, so here's our given ratio, 2 to 5, and that represents baseball and football cards, starting with baseball. So the 2 is the baseball and the 5 is the football. Let's go ahead and write that down, 2 to 5, with the 2 being the baseball and the 5 being the football. Okay, and then the question specifically says how many football cards does he have? Well, again, we're given a total of 147 sports cards. So if we have 147 as the total, and it says how many football cards, then the X is going to be the football over total. So if we're looking for football over total, our original needs to be football over total. So we go back to our part over part, and the football is represented by the 5. So we have 5 out of every, just add the 2 parts, 2 plus 5 is 7. So 5 out of every 7 cards is football, and we set this up as a proportion, and we can solve it. Again, this is another one where I would use cross products, where we just cross multiply and divide. Okay, but I'm going to show that to you as the first thing we'll do is find the product of 5 and 147. So we multiply 147 times 5. And when we do that, we get 735. But we're now going to divide by the 7. So we have 735 divided by 7. Alright, 7 goes into 7, one time. Of course, that is 7. So when we subtract, we do not have a remainder, but we need to bring down our 3. Now, 7 does not go into 3, and that's what we just brought down, so we would need to put a 0 up here. Alright, and then 7 times 0 is 0, so if you worked that out, of course, you would subtract and have a remainder of 3. Now you can bring down your 5. Now it says 7 into 35, and 7 goes into 35 exactly 5 times. 7 times 5 is 35, and we have a remainder of 0. Okay, so our answer is 105. So 105 out of the 147 cards would be the football cards. Okay, that's a few practice problems at using a proportion.